like to introduce Matt Daniels. Matt has flown out from the East Coast and unfortunately tried to fly out 2 days ago and was stranded on an airplane. But Matt is here today to share a message with us. He's from Good for All. And Matt, come and tell us what you have to say.
Sorry to break up your conversations, everybody. Maybe I have something useful to say. I try to tell myself that whenever my flights get canceled, so I made it to this event. I want to thank Jim and the board of Barnabas for having me. There are folks in this audience who've been a great encouragement to me personally, so I want to thank you folks as well. Our organization works internationally. You'll see that reflected on our website, which is goodofall.org. That's goodofall.org. We have 6 academic centers on 3 continents. I'm actually flying to London today for an event that we're doing there, which has as its purpose undermining the growth of radical political Islam in the United Kingdom. But my focus today is on our work in the U.S. And it's a big topic, it's a serious topic, so I'm going to move fast through my material because I want to be sure we have time to address it. I've been trying to think about a mental picture to describe what I want to share with you, and I think the best one is to imagine yourself at a beach, and the beach is filled with families and people going about their lives, enjoying God's creation, etc. And you've been entrusted with the knowledge that there's a tsunami coming, and no one can see it. And you're standing there and you have this horrified sense of the reality that all that you see before you is going to be swamped by this wave, and nobody else can see it. That's, in a way, what I've been going through over the last 10 years. In the human sense, my work was driven by my legal education, my doctoral work in politics. I'm an attorney with a PhD. I study social change movements. That's what I do. And it hit me between the eyes when I was doing my doctoral work that there was a giant wave coming that would swamp our faith-based institutions, our churches, our parachurch organizations, all the structures that we've been building in the United States over the last couple of 100 years, which are premised upon a certain wonderful, actually, level of religious freedom, freedom of conscience, are in peril. And the social change that is coming is bigger than what we realize. If you study social change movements, social change happens geometrically, not arithmetically. So it always surprises people when the wave hits. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is a response to this wave. The wave is the legal system of the United States being turned against people of faith. Some background on this, just so I don't sound like an alarmist. There are deep cultural changes that have been driving this for several decades. I'm just going to mention a few of them. The loss of any sense of transcendent moral absolutes. The notion that, there's a higher law and that people of faith have a right to certain freedoms because of that higher law, which is greater than the law of man. We've had a trend in this country and in the West called legal positivism, which has eliminated that concept. Loss of the view that rights have their origin in God. That's gone from our legal elites. The tendency of darkness to masterfully attach itself to things that are good and true, like the concept of civil rights, and then twist and distort them into things that are bad. We're going to talk about that today, briefly. And so what we're going to be up against in the future is a distortion of the concept of civil rights, which originally was created to protect fundamental freedoms like freedom of religion, into something that will be turned against faith-based institutions, faith-based charities, parachurch organizations, the church itself, and individual believers. And we're only at the beginning. Even here in California, where you're more aware of this than other people, it's still the early stage. The geometric progression has not hit yet. The real victims will be our children and grandchildren. And I think we have one generation in which to prepare for this. I think we have time, actually, and I want to talk about our work to do that. So we talked about the fact that this has been building for decades. It's moving towards us through a number of different potent channels. I won't go into the details. Let me tell you about the results. First of all, we are going to move into an era where people of faith are functionally second-class citizens in this society. I'm not going to go into the details. There's no time. Just that's the summary. You're going to be second-class citizens. If you live your life based on your faith, if you express your faith, if you associate with other people who come together based on their faith, you're second-class citizen, okay? And that's going to be true for your kids and your grandkids. Faith-based organizations, we've heard from many tonight, a whole panoply. Remember I talked about that scene on the beach, people, families, enjoying God's creation, flourishing, thriving, banned. Faith-based organizations will functionally be banned. Now, there won't be a big federal law that will be passed saying the Ban Faith-Based Organizations Act. It'll just be the cumulative effect of 1,000 legal decisions by 1,000 judges and 1,000 courts and 1,000 legal activist organizations, which will result in what we're increasingly seeing in places like Europe, where we do work, where FBOs, if they want to keep their character as a faith-based organization, are banned. Now, the church can go underground. The church thrives in persecution. I realize that. But it's also helpful if we can be intelligent and thoughtful about preparing for this before it happens. Another thing you need to understand, and this is kind of a classic truth from the history of civil rights, the law is a teacher, okay? So once you're made a second-class citizen, it sets in motion a whole nother wave of private discrimination against you. I mean, why was segregation in the South so evil? I mean, after all, what's the big deal if you have a water fountain for a white person and a water fountain for a black person? I mean, they both can get a drink of water, right? The problem is, separate but equal sent a signal that black people were second-class citizens and encouraged all of the other behaviors that were characteristic of that era, like beatings, lynchings, rape, and so on of African Americans. The law is a teacher, and the law is going to send a very negative message to private actors, to private groups, about you and about your faith, and that's going to have real consequences for you and your kids. Remember, I talked about geometric acceleration. It gets worse faster than you think, all right? Let me talk about the strategies that we're using now to deal with what's coming. And listen, please, I don't mean any disrespect to anyone. These are all legitimate activities of the kingdom of God. They're legitimate things to be doing, but they're not going to be enough to deal with what's coming, all right? You often hear about Christians who will say to you, well, we're going to do one of these four things, and unfortunately, it won't be sufficient. So the first strategy that won't be sufficient is to just preach and proclaim the gospel. I'm all for preaching and proclaiming the gospel, but it's going to become increasingly difficult and borderline or de facto illegal, okay? Second strategy, I hear this a lot. We need to care for and love the poor and the oppressed, and that'll win the world to Christ, and that's the best strategy. Well, caring for the oppressed and the poor is a mandate, and we all need to be involved at some level in doing that, but that's not going to be enough to stop what's coming. Just a quick example. We don't have a lot of time to go into all the cases. Catholic Charities in Boston, largest non-governmental provider of adoption services in New England, placing primarily black and Latino children in adoptive homes for decades with a high success rate. We all know how important adoption is, right? When the Massachusetts courts created so-called gay marriage, they went to the Catholics and they said, you've got to do gay adoptions. And the Catholic Archbishop, who I know, Archbishop O'Malley, said, look, other people can do gay adoptions. That's fine. We're Catholics. We can't do gay adoptions. We just want to keep doing what we've done for decades. And he said, no, I'm sorry. That's no longer allowed in Massachusetts. Catholic Charities adoption was closed overnight, and no one complained. No one. There was not a single article or editorial in any media outlet in New England that complained. This was 5 or 6 years ago, all right? That's what the future looks like. I had a conversation once with a ministry leader who's a good guy, and he kept saying to me over and over again, the ministry that I work for, we have the Jesus that people love, Our ministry has the Jesus that people love, and that's our defense against this sort of thing. And I said, if you remember anything from my conversation with you, please remember that the Jesus who people love is going to be illegal. The Catholics, in my opinion, have the Jesus that people love. I mean, placing kids in adoptive families, that's the Jesus that I love. And that was illegal in Boston, and it still is. Next illegitimate strategy. Well, now let me be very careful about this. This is actually a legitimate strategy. It's just not sufficient. And that is sort of the conservative circle the wagons strategy. You know, we're going to talk to people in the pews about our rights. We're going to mobilize the Christian vote, get out the base, win back America. We're not big enough to do that anymore in this culture. That's not going to work. I'm all for educating people in the pews. I'm all for movements to protect our rights and freedoms. The last illegitimate strategy, which is the default strategy for the church in many cases, is what I call the ostrich strategy. People don't even know they have a strategy, and that is just to stick your head in the sand, hope this goes away, doesn't affect you and your kids. That's not biblical, and it's not going to work. So we can't avoid it by doing church or doing ministry. We can't hide from it. And we can't even really protect our rights anymore by fighting for our rights. So the question is, what do we do? This has preoccupied me for a decade. What do we do about this? What I'm going to share with you is an idea that is the subject of my remarks today that I think offers us one opportunity to do something about the problem. Can we put up the PowerPoint? So what I'm going to talk to you about today is an effort to reclaim the legal high ground of civil rights for people of faith, all right? To take back what darkness has hijacked and distorted or perverted in order to oppress people of faith in America. As you know, far from being opposed to faith or to faith-based institutions or faith-based charities, the tradition of civil rights in America was born in the church. It was born in the black church. That's why we called it the King Rights Initiative. We want to remind everybody where civil rights came from, all right? And there's some very interesting and deep reasons for that I'm going to talk about in a moment. Obviously, it's a double entendre, because these are rights that were given to us by the King of Heaven. So it's also a reminder that we're, in a sense, advocating for our God-given rights. But let me talk to you about the details of this strategy. David Wills of the National Christian Foundation, who's an advisor to me and a friend and an encourager, has said that this strategy that I'm going to share with you is going to become the foundation for all of our efforts to protect ministries that are based on faith at the local, national, and international level, which otherwise are going to run afoul of the system being created by our legal and cultural elites. So let me go to the next slide. Let me talk to you first about the spiritual foundation of this effort. You're an audience that probably understands the concept of common grace, what Catholics call natural law. This is the realm of truth that is woven into the creation by God the Creator, that's accessible to people beyond just the Christian community. It's bigger than just the truth of the gospel. The spiritual engine for what we do is the Imago Dei, people made in the image of God. Okay, that's the origin of our rights. We don't use the term Imago Dei, we use a secular cognate for that term, which is human dignity. But human dignity makes no sense unless you understand that people are made in the image of God. Fair enough. Great irony that we are facing today is that the secularized civil rights movement really has no foundation, because they've lost any sense of the Imago Dei. They're adamant about civil rights, but in fact their view of civil rights is unfounded in any sort of natural law or common grace foundation. So in the 60s, the religious faith of the civil rights leaders gave them the courage and the capacity to overcome intense, violent evil and racism in American society. And I think we can overcome the tsunami that's coming, but we're going to have to use a lot of the same strategies. By the way, so why was the civil rights movement born in the African American church? Let me give you 3 reasons. 1, their view of man. They believed that people were made in the image of God. They were not things. The whole institution of slavery, which later led to segregation, was premised on the view that people were things or objects. So that's one reason. 2, their view of a higher law. They believed that there was a higher law that judges the law of man. And if the law of man is against the higher law, it must fall. Doesn't matter if the Supreme Court said separate but equal is okay in Plessy versus Ferguson. Doesn't matter if the state legislature of Alabama said that colored water fountains are okay. There was a higher law that judged those laws as being evil. Finally, third reason that the civil rights movement was born in the African American church was because they understood the concept of loving your enemy, which is radical and comes only from God, right? That you can overcome evil with good. Malcolm X tried to do the same thing with a different mechanism, and he failed. In fact, he ended up dead. And so we have an opportunity now to harness those same principles and to use them in this struggle. I've already mentioned this. Why do we need to reclaim civil rights for people of faith? I don't think I need to belabor this because we're here in California. You're at the cutting edge of what's coming, and it's going to get worse here faster than anywhere else. Be encouraged, by the way. I'm sometimes discouraged by how the civil rights movement has been, in a sense, hijacked. But the authentic African American church is with us, and they know that the moral capital of the civil rights movement is being stolen and misused by a movement that's fundamentally secular and hostile to our faith. And they will stand with us. In fact, I think the Lord can do great things in the future when the white and black church come together to reaffirm the heritage and history of civil rights in America. Starting in the classroom, I'm going to talk to you about what we're doing in Atlanta. Atlanta is the birthplace of the civil rights movement, right? So we decided to start the King Rights Initiative there, okay? It has an educational component. This slide is just a quote from Lincoln about how important education is. Let me talk to you about what we're doing in Atlanta. Whoops, here we go. So the Georgia Department of Education has signed an agreement with us. It also involves a Georgia Public Broadcasting. We're going to do a documentary on public broadcasting on the origin of the civil rights movement in the church, and woven into this documentary will be all of the themes and principles that I'm sharing with you about the integral connection between freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech and association for people of faith, and civil rights, okay? All of those things are essential for your ministries to do the work that you're doing. You need freedom of speech to preach the gospel. You need freedom of association to come together with other people who share your faith. You need freedom of conscience to turn down mandates from the government that tell you to violate your faith, like the Catholics in Boston. You got to have all those things to have basic religious freedom. We'll be working with leaders in the civil rights movement who understand what I'm saying to you today. For example, Martin Luther King Advisory Council, which is a state-created entity in Georgia, frankly created to try to take the legacy of Dr. King away from the King Family Foundation, which has really famously abused its control of many of the documents of Dr. King. They've endorsed us. So we've got the support of some very influential folks in the civil rights community. There are others, but I just decided to share that quote with you for the sake of giving you a little bit of background. Now, the documentary will be done. It'll be on PBS in the fall. It'll be introduced by the Georgia Department of Ed into every public high school in Georgia. So that's the Georgia phase. But the phase I'm really here to talk to you about is the national phase. We have to take this national, and I could use your help. We've got 3 pathways to do it that we're already working on. Georgia Department of Ed is going to share our curriculum and educational resources with other state departments of education around the country. Georgia Public Broadcasting is going to put the documentary on the national PBS feed. And I've already started working with a number of ministries, evangelical, Catholic, and Mormon, to come up with strategies for promulgating, promoting, and distributing the materials from this initiative within their respective faith communities. That includes the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, who are very interested in what we're doing because so many of their charities are being oppressed. Young Life is going to be holding a national conference for us. They've been very open. Wheaton College is going to organize churches in the Chicago area and integrate our materials into some of their curricula. So that's good. Behind the scenes, we're really developing a potent online presence and movement. We've been around 2 years. Our online audience is 10 million. If our average annual growth rate stays just, if we just have arithmetic growth for the next 3 years, we'll be at 25 million by 2017. What this reflects, by the way, is that this message really appeals to young people. And I believe it's because we're harnessing something deep in their heart about who they are as being made in the image of God. The world doesn't even tell them this, and yet they know it's true, you know? That you have value and that you have rights because you're made in the image of God. I mean, civil rights or human rights are the most profound expression, practically speaking, of the love of God for man that we can have in our legal system. And people online are responding to our message. The interesting thing about the truth of God is that it's so powerful that it works all the time, everywhere, even with people who don't know thing one about the gospel. And I think that's why we're seeing this growth. Strategic partners. So I've mentioned a few of them. There's a list here. But the one I really wanted to talk about is you. We need ambassadors for this movement. If you are concerned about your children and grandchildren growing up in a society where they can share their faith, where they can associate with others who share their faith, where they can be engaged in parachurch ministry, if you want to see your kids and grandkids live in that kind of society, we'd like to have you become an ambassador for us for this national phase. We need people to help us get this into the school systems around the country. We need people to help us get this further into the parachurch and faith community organizations and institutions to help distribute the materials. So here's an offer for you, by the way. If you will give me a feedback form, I will send you an advance preview on DVD of the special that's been scripted and is now in production at Georgia Public Broadcasting. In fact, I'd be very curious. You guys would be a great audience to give me some early feedback on whether you think this thing is effective. So I'm going to turn you into kind of a focus group. I don't know if that's legal, but hey. So if you want a DVD of the special when it comes out in the fall, give me your form and I'll send you one. Look forward to partnering with you, those of you who are interested, for the sake of our children and grandchildren. Thank you very much. And I actually finished early, Jim.